Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Daily Friend Wrap. I'm your host, Nicholas Lorimer, joined today by Mr. Marius Roodt. Let's get into our first news story of today, and this concerns the Constitutional Court judgment yesterday on the Electoral Amendment Act. This act was drawn up by Parliament after a court said that it's not correct that people were not able to run as independents for political office in South Africa's Parliament. Up till that court ruling and this legislation, you had to be a member of a political party to become a member of Parliament. Well, many aspects of this new law, of the changes to the Electoral Amendment Law, were challenged in the court. But in the court ruling, only most of the law was upheld. Most of the changes were upheld, so independents will be allowed to run in much the system that the government cooked up in that legislation. However, one thing was changed, which was previously, if you did not already have representation in Parliament, you needed to get 15%, you need to get signatures equal to 15% of the votes that it took to get a seat in Parliament in the last election, which the court basically arbitrarily high barrier to entry. So they've reduced that for independent candidates to 1,000 signatures is all you need to get on the ballot as an independent. If you're a political party who's not already represented in Parliament, the 15% threshold still remains the same. Now, at the IRR, we've been critical of many parts of this bill. Marius, what do you make of all this? Good change, bad change? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's probably, it's a good ruling that independents only need 1,000 votes to be able to register to stand for Parliament. But it's still a bit disappointing that some of the more dodgy pieces of this legislation have remained intact. What was struck down was that independents are only able to run for 200 of the regional seats to Parliament and not all 400, which means in actual fact, an independent will need to get more votes to get one seat than a political party will have to, because of the way the seats are going to be calculated. And there's still quite big problems with the way seats are recalculated once a vacancy occurs after an election. So when an MP or whether a representative of a political party or an independent decides to resign or is kicked out of the party, if they're a member of a political party, the way that's still calculated is still a bit fishy, because there's no by-elections, even though you are voting for individuals now. So it's all still a bit of a mess, and it's all goes back to, this legislation was pretty bad in the first place. And I don't see this legislation or this electoral system lasting until 2029. As far as I know, the government has said they're going to be looking at amending the electoral system ahead of 2029. So we can maybe have a system like the one we use at municipal level, at provincial and national level, which was actually the one that was suggested when we first started talking about electoral reform. The Ministerial Advisory Committee's report, the majority report, actually said that's what we should do, scale up the system we use at municipal level to provincial and national level. But in the wisdom of the ANC, this was decided against. So we'll have to see what happens. It's also political parties still have to get this big signature requirement, which is up to about 15,000 people, which is quite a lot, because you have to get names and people's ID numbers. And as it stands now, or before the Electoral Act was amended, to register as a political party, all you had to do at the national level was just get 1,000 signatures and pay a 5,000 Rand fee to the IEC. You obviously, to stand in elections, there was a bit more expensive. I think it cost about 270,000 Rand to stand at national level for Parliament, and then I think about 30,000 Rand to stand in each province. So yeah, you'd have to fork out about 400,000 or 500,000 Rand, which actually in the big scheme of things isn't that much. For an individual, it's quite a lot. But I think if you're a fairly well-organized political party, it should be money that you should be able to raise. So yeah, there's still quite a lot of problems with this, and I think we might still see some more challenges to it. But as it stands now, it's probably all systems go for the election, which we're probably going to see happening between May and August next year.
Yeah, it seems to me not at all an ideal circumstance, but as you say, it may be difficult to change things at this point. Hopefully, we get an election result, however, that I think is still very broadly in line with what people voted pretty accurately in line with what people voted for. But we shall have to see how this new system works in practice. Okay, let's move on to our next story, and this is the South African GDP figures for the third quarter, which show that in quarter-on-quarter growth, the South African economy contracted 0.2% in the third quarter of 2023. This is the 3 months through September. The main areas that have been hit hard are agriculture, manufacturing, construction, although I'm not entirely sure the seasonal variance in agriculture does go up and down a lot during the quarter, so that's not the most important one. Manufacturing construction decreases, though, is very concerning. And at the same time, I believe he is the richest South African, Johan Rupert, says that South Africa can no longer attract foreign investment because it has failing infrastructure, lawlessness, and lack of consequence for corruption. He says he specifically said that he doubted South Africa's ability to agree on a social contract with business, labor, and government to address the country's socio-economic challenges, putting the blame on politicians. Now, I agree with his overall assessment that investment is really being hurt by some of the factors he mentioned, but I'm not so keen on his solutions thing, this idea of a social contract between business, government, and labor. That's very often a way that sort of big groups lock out smaller groups from an economy or a society. And in fact, I think many of the ways we got into this mess in the first place was because of a sort of social compact between, as you've put it, Marius, big unions, big government, and big business. What do you make of this, and what do you make of our not so good GDP figures?
Well, the GDP numbers, again, I think are in South Africa as it stands, is a dog bites man story. I don't think anybody's too surprised. And a lot of the problems are self-inflicted. A lot of the reduction in GDP is because of things like load shedding, because of the issues at the ports. These are all things that the government should be trying to fix. But, I think they don't have, I don't know if they can't or they simply won't. And I think it's a bit of both, to be honest. I don't think this government's actually too interested in trying to run things properly. And that's why we're seeing the problems we have. And as I've said before on the show, if the economy is shrinking by 0.2%, that's not just these abstract numbers. That means there's going to be businesses that fail. That means people are going to lose their jobs. And these are real human beings at the end of the day, with all the kinds of hopes and dreams that any of us have, that lives are being ruined because of the way the government's running South Africa. And there's so much human potential that's being destroyed in South Africa just because of how badly things are being run. And I think that's what we need to remember. And it's actually disgraceful. And I think I agree with you. Obviously, Johan Rupert, I think he's quite right with what he's diagnosing there. But I think his solution is incorrect. As you say, big unions or big labor, big government, and big business. I like to call it a bit of an unholy trinity. Always works together to keep out the little guy, and that's what we've had in South Africa. For most of the post-apartheid era, to be honest, where we've had big business, big government, and big labor work together through things like NEDLAC, and you have these kind of, for example, collective bargaining agreements, which is fine for big companies, which can afford certain increases, but then that screws over little companies, which are legally obliged, as far as I understand, to give the same kind of increases that come out of these collective bargaining things. So it's all, it's easy. And also that's also things such as BE. Big business is pretty happy to go along with things like BE because they have the resources to employ an entire department to make sure they're compliant with it. They have the money to attract the top talent and so on, where smaller businesses don't really have those kinds of resources. So yeah, it's overall it's quite a depressing show, I think.
Definitely. And like you, I just want to re-emphasize that point you made about how these are real people's lives. When you see a flat economic growth number like that, what that means is more children who won't be able to have food, more people who will not be able to look forward to a life of prosperity, more people who will be stuck in poverty, more people who will be facing major crises in their life because they just don't have the money to sort out some of their basic needs. And that's why it's imperative that we get that growth number up. Okay, let us go on to our last topic for today, and this is our Chief Justice Raymond Zondo, who is speaking at a judges' conference in the Northwest. At this conference, he said that the judiciary should put their heads together and find ways to improve the country's legislative arm. He has over recent months been talking a lot about how he's very concerned about how Parliament in particular is dysfunctional, and how he doesn't think it would be able to stop another attempt at state capture, as his commission looked into during the Zuma years. This was the gathering he was speaking at brings judges and magistrates from across the country to discuss issues relating to judicial independence, efficiency, and other issues. Zondo concluded his remarks by saying, "We must make sure that in the fourth decade of our democracy and beyond, we do not repeat the mistakes that we've made in the past 30 years. And as a country, I'm not speaking about the judiciary, there are many mistakes that have been made." So what frustrates me about this is judges should not be trying to improve the legislative arm. The legislative arm can only be improved at the end of the day by the politicians in it and the people who vote for it. It is not the place of judges to try and fix that thing. And I think, in a sense, he's kind of trying to find a solution here that doesn't get too political. Says, oh, well, the judiciary, maybe we can nudge Parliament along in the right direction. I think that's very much the kind of trading water approach to solving South Africa's problems rather than actually tackling the problem. What do you think, Marius?
Yeah, and also, we have the separation of powers. The legislative arm shouldn't be, or the judicial arm shouldn't be interfering in the legislative arm. And with Justice Zondo saying that Parliament is dysfunctional, that's all true. But Parliament's only as good as the people that are in it. And I think part of the reason we are in such trouble as a country is because the ANC, which has obviously been the biggest party in Parliament since 1994, has over the years been sending lower and lower quality people to Parliament. It's not a place where you top people go, I don't think. They're probably actually more deployed to provinces to become premiers and so on. And I think in the initial post-apartheid period, a lot of people speak about Parliament then as a kind of a golden era. Even ANC politicians or MPs saw Parliament as a proper safeguard against excesses from the central government, and were happy to question people like President Nelson Mandela and so on. So the reason for that was a lot of people who'd been involved in the struggle, actually good people, whether you agreed with them politically or not, well-educated, dedicated to South Africa. They came to Parliament and then they were snatched up by the private sector and so on. And the quality of people available to the ANC just started getting worse and worse, I think. So we see the problems we have now. If you read some parliamentary transcripts, some of the questions that get asked, it'll make the hair on your head stand up. And to be fair, there's lots of problems with the quality of MPs from a lot of other parties as well. It's definitely not an ANC issue. So yeah, it's I think, but that's where a lot of our problems come from. We can look at Parliament, but Parliament is only going to be as good as the people that go there. So I think we can have all kinds of other ways to try to fix it, but I think that's what it comes down to: the quality of actual MPs, whether Parliament's going to be a functional institution which either acts as a rubber stamp or as something that's kind of a guardrail against the worst excesses of the government.
Right, and I also think it's incumbent on the South African people to hold Parliament more strictly accountable for times when it doesn't do what it's supposed to do. And there are many times in the last couple of decades that it has not done what it is supposed to do, as you say. Parliament has massively decreased in quality, and now it's not just speeches or questions that are stupid or silly or race baiting or whatever. It's also just dull and pointless. You have members of Parliament reading out speeches that were clearly either written by a researcher or maybe an AI or something that are just sort of soulless and lifeless and often go on ridiculous tangents. An institution that is at the heart of our entire democratic system, and if it doesn't work, I don't think South Africa is going to work. Okay, that is all the time we have for today. We hope that you found the show interesting. That's a wrap.